I'm Robin Shaw, 42 years old, and I've spent the last 15 years as a senior account manager at Northbridge Solutions. Over that time, I've built and maintained key client portfolios that generated over 8.5 million in revenue in the last fiscal year alone. My reputation here is built on reliability, precision in documentation, and a deep understanding of every contract and communication tied to my accounts. I take pride in my ability to anticipate challenges, ensuring every client interaction is recorded and every file backed up, no detail overlooked. It's not just about closing deals, it's about maintaining trust and continuity, even under pressure. That reputation made what happened during the last quarterly sales meeting all the more shocking. Gregory Mason, our regional sales director, stood in front of 32 of our colleagues and without warning or any prior discussion, publicly deleted my primary client files from the company server. I watched as the progress bars completed one by one, erasing years of relationship data, custom proposals, and ongoing negotiations with some of our top clients. It wasn't a system error or an accident. It was deliberate, and it was humiliating. The room went silent, eyes flicking between Mason and me as the last file disappeared. I locked eyes with him and, keeping my voice measured and steady, said, "Understood, Gregory. No anger, no outburst, just calm acknowledgement." Inside, however, my mind was already running through a strategic assessment. What was he trying to accomplish? What were the implications for my clients, for my team, and for me personally? I scanned the faces of my colleagues, noting their surprise and confusion, but also the implicit understanding that this wasn't just a misstep, it was sabotage. I knew immediately that this was not a simple act of managerial correction. Deleting client files in front of the entire sales floor was a public statement, a calculated move to undermine my position and credibility. The fact that Mason chose such a public forum suggested he wanted to send a message, to me and to everyone watching. But as I stood there, I reminded myself that losing reputation or data didn't mean losing ground. I had backups, documented contracts, and a thorough knowledge of every client relationship. More importantly, I had the composure to navigate this professionally. The first step was to stabilize the situation without escalating tension. I made sure not to respond emotionally or defensively, understanding that any reaction could be twisted or used against me. Instead, I focused on what needed to be done next, assess the damage, secure evidence, and prepare for the legal and professional challenges that would inevitably follow. Mason's reckless move left a lot of questions unanswered, and I planned to have those answers before anyone else could spin the narrative. In a room full of seasoned sales professionals, maintaining credibility is everything. So, while the files were disappearing from the company's system, I silently reaffirmed my commitment to the clients and colleagues who depended on me. I knew that my next actions would define not only my career, but also the integrity of the client relationships I had worked so hard to build. This wasn't just about lost data, it was about preserving trust, demonstrating resilience, and ultimately turning an act of sabotage into a strategic advantage. That moment marked the beginning of a calculated response, one grounded in professionalism, thorough documentation, and strategic patience. While Mason's click of the delete button was loud and public, my response would be quieter, more methodical, and ultimately more powerful. The path ahead wasn't clear, but my experience had taught me that calm, precise action beats reaction every time. And so, with a steady breath, I prepared to navigate the fallout, confident that a measured approach would lead to justice and restoration. Since joining Northbridge Solutions 15 years ago, my career trajectory has been defined by a consistent commitment to building strong, sustainable client relationships and driving revenue growth. Over that time, I developed and managed portfolios that generated an average annual revenue of $7 million, a figure that reflected not only the volume of business, but the depth and quality of those client connections. I understand that in this line of work, the numbers alone don't tell the full story. Behind every contract is a relationship, and behind every relationship is a complex web of communications, negotiations, and trust-building exercises. My role was not just to secure deals, but to ensure continuity and satisfaction that would outlast any single transaction. Early on, I recognized the importance of integrating technology and process controls into client management. When the company decided to migrate to a new customer relationship management (CRM) system, I took the lead, not just coordinating the transition, but designing backup protocols and data integrity measures that drastically reduced risks of data loss. Before my involvement, the company had experienced minor but costly incidents where client information was corrupted or lost. I spearheaded the development of encrypted backup schedules, layered access controls, and audit logs, ensuring that every client file had multiple redundancies. This wasn't just an IT project. It was a strategic safeguard for the business continuity of both my clients and the company. Throughout my tenure, documentation became my professional hallmark. I meticulously maintained detailed email trails, recorded changes in contract versions, and archived backup files in secure repositories, always with the anticipation that these records might one day be needed to resolve disputes or clarify obligations. I was aware that in the corporate environment, misunderstandings or conflicts often hinge on the availability of clear chronological evidence. Hence, I developed a habit of confirming all client communications and agreements in writing, organizing them systematically by client and project phase. This rigorous approach extended to monitoring contract clauses, renewal dates, payment schedules, and compliance requirements, making me the go-to resource when questions arose about client commitments or company liabilities. This level of detail and foresight translated into tangible value for Northbridge. My salary, which reached $118,000 annually plus performance bonuses, reflected the company's recognition of the revenue I brought in and the risk mitigation my practices afforded. Beyond compensation, I was also granted vested stock options, acknowledging my integral role in the firm's long-term growth strategy. These benefits underscored the company's awareness of my contribution, but also, I later realized, made me a target when leadership decided to cut costs. Nevertheless, I never took my position for granted. Every quarter, I presented performance reviews complete with data-backed reports, client satisfaction surveys, and risk assessments, reinforcing my indispensability not just through words, but through documented results. In addition to internal documentation, I stayed acutely aware of the contractual landscapes governing my clients' accounts. Many contracts included clauses related to non-compete restrictions, exclusivity agreements, and termination conditions, complex elements that require precise interpretation and application. I invested considerable time familiarizing myself with these provisions, collaborating with legal counsel to clarify ambiguous terms and ensure compliance. Understanding these details was critical, especially in an industry where client poaching and intellectual property disputes are common. This knowledge gave me both confidence and leverage that I would later rely on when confronted with Gregory Mason's hostile actions. My professional network also grew steadily during these years, expanding beyond Northbridge's walls. By maintaining a reputation for integrity and reliability, I earned referrals and repeat business, strengthening my position. I cultivated relationships not only with clients, but with IT staff, legal advisors, and even executives at rival firms, always mindful of the broader ecosystem in which we operated. This network would prove invaluable in the unfolding conflict, providing insight, resources, and potential allies. In summary, my 15 years at Northbridge shaped me into a consummate professional who valued preparation, documentation, and strategic foresight. I knew that every client file represented a carefully nurtured partnership that could not simply be erased without consequence. This foundational expertise, combined with a disciplined approach to system management and contract oversight, established both my credibility and my professional security. It was a security I believed was unassailable until the day Gregory Mason publicly deleted my client files, setting in motion a challenge that would test every facet of my experience and resolve. Gregory Mason's decision to delete my client files in front of everyone was more than a reckless act of spite. It was the culmination of a calculated plan driven by intense corporate pressure and personal vendetta. Over the previous months, I'd become aware that Mason was under significant pressure from upper management to reduce the regional sales budget by at least 15%. The company was tightening its belt amid market uncertainties, and Mason was tasked with cutting costs quickly and visibly. To him, the most straightforward way to trim expenses was to replace experienced, higher-paid employees like myself with less costly junior staffers. He saw me as an expensive asset, expendable in favor of cheaper labor who could be brought in without the same benefits or severance entitlements. Beyond the financial rationale, Mason carried a personal grudge against me that went back nearly 2 years. He had been vying for a promotion to regional director, but was ultimately passed over, in part because I had quietly but effectively supported another candidate during the selection process. While I never openly opposed Mason, my professional stance had clearly irked him. Over time, his coldness toward me grew. I noticed subtle attempts to sideline me from key projects and decision-making forums. Now, with the budget cuts looming, he saw an opportunity not only to meet financial targets, but to settle a score. The deletion of my client files was intended to discredit me, making it appear as though I had been negligent or incompetent, thereby justifying his plan to replace me without the usual severance obligations. What Mason didn't anticipate was the depth of my preparation and understanding of the company's legal and technical frameworks. Over the years, I had developed expertise far beyond client relations. I knew the intricacies of our contract clauses, particularly the non-compete and severance agreements embedded in my employment contract. These clauses were designed to protect both the company and me, stipulating terms that Mason needed to honor, even if he wanted to remove me from my role. I had studied these clauses with our legal team, ensuring I fully understood my rights and obligations. Importantly, these contractual protections were not common knowledge among the sales leadership, and Mason had evidently underestimated how closely I guarded this information. Furthermore, I had implemented a system of encrypted backups for all client files and correspondence, stored securely off-site and inaccessible through the company network. These backups were my professional lifeline, unknown to most in the company, including Mason. He operated under the assumption that deleting files from the company server would be the final word, erasing years of work and client trust. In reality, my backup protocols ensured I retained comprehensive copies that could be restored or used as evidence if required. This digital fortress was built over many months of meticulous planning and collaboration with the IT department, who trusted me due to my transparency and procedural rigor. Meanwhile, I maintained a discreet but ongoing communication channel with Derek Collins, CEO of Titan Corp, a rival firm known for aggressively acquiring talent and market share. Our interactions were professional and limited to industry conferences and occasional discussions about market trends. Derek had expressed respect for my client management strategies and hinted that Titan was interested in expanding its senior sales capabilities. While these discussions were preliminary, I retained contact details and voicemail messages that would later prove crucial as an alternative path emerged amid the conflict with Mason. In sum, Mason's intent to quietly remove me from the company by orchestrating a public professional humiliation was a dangerous gamble. He failed to grasp that I was not only aware of his motivations, but equipped with the contractual knowledge, technical safeguards, and external networks necessary to counteract his moves. His strategy was short-sighted, rooted in budgetary expedience and personal animosity, rather than a full understanding of the legal and professional implications. As I stood in the wake of his actions, I recognized that Mason had opened a door to a legal and strategic contest where the stakes extended far beyond a deleted folder. I was ready to meet that challenge with the same precision and professionalism that had defined my career. After the meeting, once I was back at my desk, I began my methodical review of the incident and its implications. The deletion wasn't just symbolic, it had real consequences. My first task was to analyze exactly what Gregory Mason had done and what authority he wielded in doing so. I started by tracing the deletion event through the company's IT logs, pulling system audit trails that recorded every action taken on the server that day. The logs confirmed my initial observation. Mason had initiated the deletion from his workstation using credentials tied explicitly to his user account. However, these logs showed no subsequent authorization or approvals from HR or upper management, actions that were required under company policy before any client data could be altered or removed. I cross-referenced Mason's role description and delegated authorities with the company's official governance documents, Regional sales directors had no mandate to delete or modify client contracts or files without written consent from the legal or compliance departments. Mason's unilateral action was therefore a clear violation of internal controls and governance procedures. This finding was critical. By overriding protocol, he exposed both himself and the company to significant legal and regulatory risk. Turning to the client contracts themselves, I reviewed copies maintained in our secure repository. Each client file synced with the customer relationship management system was linked to binding contracts with specific terms and provisions. None of these contracts had been amended, terminated, or flagged for deletion in the company's contract management system. Furthermore, I verified that any alteration to these contracts required multi-level approvals, something Mason had circumvented by deleting linked files rather than following due process. This meant that, from a legal standpoint, the contracts remained valid and enforceable despite the deletion of associated digital files. Next, I discovered something alarming when I audited my email account activity. Using the IT department's email access logs, I identified unauthorized login attempts and unusual SMTP access timestamps coinciding with Mason's deletion event. It appeared Mason had somehow gained access to my email account credentials, or had coerced or tricked someone into granting temporary access. This unauthorized access allowed him to intercept and potentially manipulate client communications, which could have far-reaching implications beyond file deletion. I immediately secured a meeting with the IT security team to deepen this investigation. Together, we uncovered that the breach was limited but significant. Mason had exploited a shared password shortcut used by the sales leadership team, one that circumvented multi-factor authentication protocols. This oversight in system security controls became another point of leverage in my assessment. It demonstrated not only Mason's intent, but also the company's procedural vulnerabilities. Quantifying the damage was the next crucial step. I compiled financial records linked to the affected client files and contracts. Based on recent deal pipelines, renewal schedules, and commission projections, I conservatively estimated that the deletion could lead to lost revenue exceeding $450,000 over the next fiscal year. This figure accounted for immediate client disruption, potential contract breaches, and the erosion of client trust, factors that would impact both my compensation and the company's bottom line. In parallel, I reviewed my own employment contract. It explicitly stipulated a 90-day notice period for termination and guaranteed a severance package of $95,000 under conditions related to redundancy or unjust dismissal. Mason's action, deleting files to fabricate grounds for immediate termination without severance, was clearly in breach of these contractual protections. I documented these clauses meticulously, ensuring I had direct references and legal interpretations to support later claims. Moreover, I identified potential regulatory compliance issues arising from Mason's conduct. Data protection regulations, including our jurisdiction's equivalents to GDPR and CCPA, require strict handling of personal and business data. Mason's deletion of client files without proper authorization and failure to follow data retention policies constituted possible violations subject to investigation by data protection authorities. This added a critical external dimension to the situation, increasing the stakes beyond internal company disputes. Throughout this assessment, I maintained a professional detachment. My internal monologue was focused on identifying leverage points rather than reacting emotionally. Mason's reckless move was a clear miscalculation, born of ignorance regarding the frameworks I had systematically put in place. My encrypted backups, maintained off-site and inaccessible via the company network, remained intact and secure. These backups contained comprehensive copies of every client file, correspondence, and contract version, encrypted with keys known only to me and my trusted IT contacts. Recognizing these backups as my strategic lifeline, I immediately ensured their integrity and began organizing them for potential legal review. This step was essential, not only to restore client data, but also to substantiate my claims of sabotage and wrongful termination. With all this information consolidated, I realized Mason's maneuver had opened multiple fronts for challenge: unauthorized contract interference, data security breaches, breach of employment terms, and possible regulatory violations. My next moves would need to be precise and legally grounded. The groundwork was laid. I had confirmed Mason's lack of authority, documented the unauthorized access, quantified financial harm, and secured critical evidence, all without raising alarms prematurely. This comprehensive, unemotional assessment was the cornerstone of my strategic response. It would enable me to confront Mason and Northbridge Solutions not merely on the basis of personal affront, but with incontrovertible, documented facts that demanded professional accountability. The situation was far from resolved. In fact, it was just the opening salvo in a complex dispute where knowledge, preparation, and systematic action would determine the outcome. After consolidating all the technical and contractual evidence, my next priority was to put this information in the hands of someone trained to navigate employment disputes, someone who could translate my meticulously gathered facts into a clear, actionable legal strategy. I immediately scheduled a consultation with Mark Benson, an employment attorney I had worked with briefly in the past on contract review matters. Mark's reputation for precise legal analysis and pragmatic solutions made him an obvious choice for this escalating situation. When I met with Mark the following morning, I came prepared. I handed him a carefully organized chronological dossier that laid out every detail relevant to the case. This included meeting minutes from the quarterly sales meeting, documenting the exact time and sequence of Mason's deletion action, along with contemporaneous notes I had taken to capture the atmosphere and reactions in the room. I also included the email threats and subtle undermining communications I had received from Mason over the preceding months. Messages that, while not overtly hostile, clearly indicated a building vendetta. These emails were arranged in a thread that showed his growing impatience and intent, helping demonstrate a pattern rather than an isolated incident. In addition, I provided Mark with client correspondence that confirmed ongoing deals and contract renewals linked directly to the deleted files. These emails and signed contract versions were critical, as they established the commercial value impacted by the deletion and the enforceability of the agreements. To support this, I delivered backup logs and encrypted file inventories from the off-site storage locations I controlled. The backups had precise timestamps and hash verifications, establishing that the files existed intact both before and after the incident, reinforcing the sabotage narrative. Understanding the importance of witness corroboration, I collected formal written statements from 2 senior sales representatives who had been present at the meeting and personally observed Mason's public deletion. Their affidavits detailed their surprise and concern, noting that no prior warnings or company policies justified the action. I also secured a declaration from the head of IT security, who verified the unauthorized email access and detailed the company's internal policies that Mason had circumvented. These statements added layers of credibility to my case and underscored the breach of protocol. During the meeting, my internal focus remained on leveraging Mason's fundamental ignorance of the contractual language and company policies, particularly the non-compete and severance clauses embedded in my employment agreement. I explained these clauses to Mark, highlighting their protective intent and how Mason's actions violated them outright. Mark immediately recognized these contractual provisions as powerful leverage not only for negotiation, but as a basis for claims of wrongful termination and breach of contract. Together, we outlined a preliminary legal approach. First, to establish the factual timeline and violations. Second, to assert my rights under the contract. And third, to prepare for regulatory engagement concerning data tampering and unauthorized access. Mark advised me to maintain strict professionalism and document all communications with Mason going forward, emphasizing that every interaction could be pivotal in court or mediation. Recognizing the need for airtight evidence preservation, I took immediate steps to create encrypted duplicates of the entire dossier, storing copies both offline and in secure cloud locations accessible only by me and Mark. Additionally, I coordinated with IT to obtain system access logs that detailed Mason's login times and actions on the network during the deletion episode. These logs were foundational to disproving any claim that Mason acted within his authorized scope. I also began compiling a comprehensive summary report cataloging all potential regulatory breaches, including violations of data privacy laws and internal data protection policies. This report was formatted for submission to the Labour Board and the Data Protection Authority, with instructions for Mark to file the complaints once we finalized the legal strategy. The purpose was to broaden the pressure on Mason and Northbridge Solutions, making clear that multiple oversight agencies would be monitoring their conduct. Throughout this process, I maintained an internal monologue focused on systematic escalation rather than emotional reaction. Each piece of evidence was a building block, each legal right a strategic tool. I reminded myself that the power lay in my preparation and patience. Mason may have acted impulsively, but I was constructing a professional legal fortress around my position. The next steps involved drafting formal legal notices and setting timelines for company responses, while also preparing to protect client relationships from collateral damage. Controlled, deliberate action was essential, not just to protect my interests, but to maintain the trust of the clients whose files Mason had recklessly deleted. This phase of the plan was critical. By bringing in expert legal counsel and assembling a comprehensive documented case, I ensured that Mason's reckless sabotage could not be swept under the rug. My preparedness and methodical documentation transformed a moment of public humiliation into the foundation for a powerful professional and legal counterattack, one that would be impossible for Mason or Northbridge Solutions to ignore. When I first handed my dossier over to Mark Benson, I knew the strength of our position hinged on transforming raw evidence into a legally coherent narrative. Mark immediately dove into the documents with a keen eye for detail, validating my initial assessments and unearthing additional angles I hadn't fully considered. His review revealed multiple distinct breaches that fortified our case far beyond a simple workplace dispute. First and foremost was Mason's blatant violation of my severance terms. Our contract clearly stipulated a 90-day notice period and a severance package totaling $95,000 in the event of termination without cause or redundancy. Mason's unilateral deletion of client files was intended to fabricate cause, bypassing these protections entirely. Mark confirmed that this constituted a fundamental breach of contract, rendering any termination based on those grounds invalid. This breach alone opened the door for claims of wrongful termination and contractual damages. In parallel, Mark highlighted the illegal deletion of company data as a serious offense under both internal policies and external regulatory frameworks. Company protocol mandated multi-level approvals before any client file could be altered or removed. Mason's actions sidestepped every safeguard, constituting data tampering and destruction. More critically, this wasn't just a breach of company rules. It potentially violated data protection laws designed to ensure the integrity and confidentiality of client information. Mark pointed out that under regulations like the GDPR and equivalent local statutes, unauthorized deletion of client data triggered obligations for immediate reporting and remediation. The risk to Northbridge Solutions was significant. Regulatory bodies could impose fines, sanctions, and reputational damage. From a legal standpoint, Mason had exposed the company to regulatory scrutiny that could cascade far beyond the internal HR dispute. The email trails we had compiled provided a revealing glimpse into Mason's intent. Mark noted that the pattern of messages, subtle threats, veiled undermining, and finally the public deletion demonstrated premeditation. These communications established a timeline showing Mason's escalating vendetta, which strengthened claims for punitive damages and demonstrated a breach of fiduciary duty. As a senior director, Mason was expected to act in the company's best interest. Deliberately sabotaging a senior employee to cut costs violated that trust and exposed him to personal liability. From a technical perspective, Mark was impressed with the forensic evidence provided by our IT department. The network diagrams and audit logs clearly showed that critical system operations depended on my credentials and that Mason lacked the proper authorization to execute the deletion. Even more telling, the unauthorized access to my email account exposed a security vulnerability which Mason exploited. Mark advised this aspect could form the basis for further claims involving cybersecurity negligence and unauthorized access, both criminal and civil offenses, in many jurisdictions. Mark and I discussed potential claims at length. We identified 4 primary legal avenues: wrongful termination due to breach of severance terms, data destruction and tampering violating company policies and data protection laws, breach of fiduciary duty given Mason's conflict of interest and sabotage, and regulatory non-compliance with mandatory data handling and reporting requirements. Each claim was supported by layered evidence, contracts, emails, system logs, and witness statements, making it difficult for the company or Mason to deny responsibility. Together, we mapped out a systematic escalation plan. Initially, our focus would be on filing formal complaints with the Labor Board and data protection authorities. Mark emphasized the importance of preserving all evidence, including ongoing communications, to protect against any attempts at retaliation or obfuscation. We also agreed that any direct responses to Mason or Northbridge needed to be funneled through legal counsel to maintain professionalism and avoid inadvertently weakening our position. Additionally, Mark suggested we prepare for the possibility of settlement negotiations, leveraging the strength of the evidence to maximize leverage. But he cautioned against premature offers or concessions, recommending a measured approach that would maintain pressure while keeping options open. Throughout our discussions, I remained focused on maintaining a professional posture. Mark reinforced that the strongest cases emerge from calm, calculated responses rather than emotional reactions. We developed protocols for documenting every interaction, including timestamps, content, and context, so that no detail could be dismissed as hearsay or conjecture. By the end of our meeting, I had a clear understanding. This was no longer just a personal grievance. It was a multifaceted legal challenge, implicating contractual law, data security regulations, corporate governance, and employment protections. Armed with Mark's legal expertise and my comprehensive documentation, we were prepared to hold Mason and Northbridge Solutions accountable through every available channel. The groundwork was laid for a methodical, professional campaign, not just to seek remedies, but to establish a precedent for how such violations would be handled. My experience had taught me that systematic evidence gathering and legal precision would be the keys to turning this professionally perilous situation into a position of strength. The strategic battle was underway, and Mark's findings gave me the confidence that justice would be pursued not through confrontation, but through the solid weight of documented facts and legal rigor. Once Mark and I had finalized our legal strategy, the next step was to initiate formal proceedings. Early that week, I instructed Mark to draft and serve a detailed legal notice to both Gregory Mason and Northbridge Solutions corporate headquarters. The notice outlined the precise breaches identified: the unauthorized deletion of client files, violation of severance terms, and abuse of managerial authority. It contained a clear demand for immediate reinstatement to my position, or alternatively, full payment of my $95,000 severance package as stipulated under my employment contract. Serving this legal notice was a critical move, designed not only to assert my rights, but to signal that I was prepared to escalate the matter if necessary. Mark ensured the notice was professionally worded, citing relevant sections of labor law and contract clauses, making it impossible for Mason or the company to dismiss it as mere complaint or workplace grumbling. The document was delivered via certified mail and electronic receipt confirmation to both Mason's corporate email and the company's legal department. Simultaneously, Mark and I prepared formal complaints to regulatory authorities overseeing data protection and labor practices. I submitted a detailed report to the Data Privacy Commission, highlighting Mason's unauthorized deletion of client data without proper authorization or documentation, which constituted a breach of data integrity and security policies mandated under applicable laws. This complaint included forensic IT logs showing the deletion timeline, the lack of multi-level approval, and the unauthorized access to my email account. Additionally, a complaint was filed with the State Labor Board citing wrongful termination tactics and violation of severance agreement provisions. The complaint emphasized that Mason's actions were a deliberate attempt to circumvent contractual obligations, putting Northbridge Solutions at risk of legal sanctions and penalties. Copies of these complaints were logged and time-stamped, ensuring a verifiable paper trail of regulatory engagement. Parallel to these legal actions, I recognized the importance of managing the reputational aspect, especially regarding my clients. I drafted carefully calibrated communications to my top-tier accounts, those most affected by the deletion incident, informing them promptly of the situation. The message struck a professional tone, acknowledging the disruption but emphasizing continuity and my personal commitment to their business interests. I assured them that all necessary steps were underway to restore full service and protect their contractual rights. To ensure clarity and prevent any misinterpretation, I included a summary of the current status and reassured clients that their data and agreements remained intact under my secure backups and legal protection. I also invited them to direct any questions or concerns to me or my legal counsel. Maintaining this open line of communication was crucial, not only to preserve trust, but to preempt any attempts by Mason or the company to undermine those relationships. It was during this period that I received an unexpected but strategically timed contact from Derek Collins, CEO of Titan Corp. Derek had followed news of the internal turmoil at Northbridge and reached out via voicemail with an offer, a $95,000 settlement package, equivalent to my severance, coupled with a consulting role tailored to my expertise in client management and CRM systems. His message was succinct but clear. He valued the professional integrity I demonstrated and saw an opportunity to leverage my skills within Titan's expanding operations. Listening to Derek's voicemail for the third time, I recognized the leverage it provided in ongoing negotiations. The offer was generous and immediate, reflecting Titan's desire to act swiftly, contrasting with Northbridge's defensive posture. However, I remained cautious, aware that accepting any offer prematurely could undermine my legal standing or suggest weakness. Instead, I stored the voicemail securely, backing it up with encrypted copies and marking it as a critical piece of evidence, an external validation of my professional worth amid the conflict. Meanwhile, Mason appeared unaware, or perhaps willfully ignorant, of the mounting legal and regulatory actions. He continued his efforts to onboard a replacement for my position, dispatching internal memos and hosting orientation sessions with the junior rep, who was slated to take over my accounts. His communications remained terse, but maintained a veneer of normalcy, likely intended to project control to upper management and the sales team. Throughout this escalation, I maintained a strict professional demeanor in all interactions, including those with Mason. I replied to his emails with measured, factual responses or, when appropriate, deferred communication to my attorney. Every exchange was documented, time-stamped, and archived. I understood that any hint of emotional reaction or unprofessional conduct could be exploited to weaken my case. My approach was to remain courteous, composed, and unwavering, letting the evidence and legal process speak in my favor. Behind the scenes, I coordinated with IT to continue monitoring system logs for any further unauthorized access or tampering. My legal counsel and I prepared contingency plans for potential retaliatory moves by Mason or Northbridge, including attempts to restrict my access to company resources or discredit my professional standing. But for now, the legal notice and regulatory complaints had established a firm perimeter around my rights, signaling that any further infractions would escalate consequences rapidly. In this phase, the situation was precarious, but strategically contained. Mason's reckless act had provoked a professional and legal response far beyond his expectations. Northbridge Solutions now faced not only internal disruption, but external scrutiny. Meanwhile, the offer from Titan Corp shone as a beacon of alternative opportunity, one that underscored my value in the industry. The coming days would reveal how Mason chose to navigate this pressure, and how I would leverage every documented advantage to protect and advance my career. Shortly after serving the legal notice and filing the regulatory complaints, Northbridge Solutions began to experience tangible operational disruptions directly linked to Mason's mishandling of client data and his lack of understanding of critical system dependencies. The company's internal IT team reported multiple incidents where client deliveries were delayed or incomplete, problems traced back to the absence of my authorized credentials and the corrupted client files Mason had deleted. The junior replacement lacked the system knowledge and access permissions I had meticulously maintained, and Mason's failure to properly transfer those responsibilities created a bottleneck that compromised service reliability. From a professional standpoint, this was an expected but significant development. Mason's attempt to erase my role had inadvertently destabilized the very processes he sought to control. The company's clients, many of whom had been under my direct management for years, began reaching out with concerns. I received several calls and emails, not from adversaries, but from key accounts questioning the sudden drop in responsiveness and the apparent loss of their contact points. Each communication was a delicate opportunity to reaffirm my commitment and professional integrity, and I responded with carefully crafted messages emphasizing continuity and transparency without implicating internal conflicts. I documented every client interaction, saving email threads and call logs to reinforce the narrative that I remained the reliable point of contact despite the turmoil. This was critical, not only to preserve client trust, but also to build a record useful in any legal or regulatory proceedings. Maintaining client goodwill also served as leverage. Mason's reckless actions had not only endangered my position, but threatened the company's revenue streams and reputation. As these disruptions unfolded, regulatory agencies took notice. Within days, the Data Privacy Commission acknowledged receipt of the complaint and initiated a preliminary inquiry into Northbridge's data handling practices. The inquiry focused on potential breaches of data protection laws triggered by unauthorized deletions and inadequate access controls. Simultaneously, the State Labor Board began assessing claims related to wrongful termination tactics, analyzing whether Mason and the company had violated employment protections outlined in my contract. This dual-front scrutiny added increasing pressure on Mason and Northbridge's leadership. Internally, Mason's desperation became evident. I began receiving messages from him, initially terse and administrative, but increasingly urgent, as system failures mounted. He proposed informal consulting sessions, seeking my help to resolve the operational issues he himself had caused. Professionally, I maintained firm boundaries, responding politely but redirecting all communications to my legal counsel. This approach ensured that every interaction was recorded and that I avoided any appearance of impropriety or acquiescence. I was acutely aware that Mason's panic was a sign that the strategic leverage we had built was working. His cost-cutting gambit was unraveling under the weight of operational fallout and regulatory scrutiny. Each failed delivery, each worried client, and each formal inquiry chipped away at his credibility and authority. My internal monologue remained fixed on maintaining discipline and professionalism. Every setback Mason faced was an opportunity to reinforce my position by demonstrating calm competence amid chaos. At the same time, I continued to coordinate with my attorney and IT contacts to monitor ongoing system activity, ensuring no further unauthorized access or tampering occurred. This vigilance was essential to prevent Mason from attempting covert retaliation or further sabotage. I also maintained confidential communication with Derek Collins, who monitored the situation with interest, signaling that external industry players were aware of the disruption and that my professional reputation remained intact outside Northbridge's walls. Throughout this period, I upheld a posture of measured professionalism in all public and client-facing communications. Recognizing that company morale and trust were fragile, I avoided any public statements that could escalate tensions or damage client relationships. Instead, I focused on factual updates and assurances, preserving my credibility as a reliable and ethical account manager despite the corporate turmoil. In summary, the immediate aftermath of Mason's reckless deletion was not just a technical failure, but a strategic turning point. The operational disruptions at Northbridge revealed the depth of my professional value and the consequences of undermining established systems without thorough knowledge. Mason's ignorance and rash actions had triggered a cascade of client concerns, regulatory investigations, and internal desperation, all of which strengthened my negotiating position. The scene was set for the next phase of the conflict, where legal pressure and professional integrity would continue to shape the unfolding drama. The day we filed the lawsuit was the moment the conflict shifted from internal corporate drama to formal legal battle. Armed with a dossier meticulously assembled over weeks, contracts, email chains, encrypted backup files, and affidavits from witnesses who had observed Mason's sabotage, we initiated proceedings with a clear narrative backed by incontrovertible evidence. Mark Benson, my employment attorney, drafted the complaint to highlight each violation with precision: Mason's unauthorized deletion of client data, a breach of company policy and regulatory statutes, the violation of my severance agreement, which guaranteed a 90-day notice and a $95,000 payout, and the breach of fiduciary duty, given Mason's deliberate attempt to sabotage me for personal gain. The complaint emphasized the premeditated nature of these actions, supported by email correspondence, revealing Mason's escalating hostility and intent. This wasn't a case of a momentary lapse. It was a calculated campaign. Filing the suit triggered immediate actions from regulatory agencies. The Data Privacy Commission launched a deep investigation into Northbridge Solutions' data handling practices, focusing on Mason's unauthorized deletions and the systemic weaknesses he exploited. Their inquiries demanded detailed logs and compliance reports, which I provided promptly. Ensuring cooperation from my side bolstered my credibility. Concurrently, the State Labor Board reviewed the allegations of wrongful termination and severance violations, scrutinizing Northbridge's internal policies and Mason's authority limits. As the regulatory probes unfolded, Northbridge's leadership found themselves under intense pressure. Internal audits uncovered further lapses in data governance tied to Mason's tenure, intensifying scrutiny over his conduct. Meanwhile, the company's clients, already unsettled by the operational disruptions, began reconsidering their loyalties. Several long-term accounts initiated transfer discussions with competitors, citing concerns over data integrity and service continuity. These client defections, although confidential, were significant blows to Northbridge's revenue and reputation. Throughout this period, Mason attempted to negotiate informally, reaching out to me with proposals to settle quietly. Each time I maintained a professional stance, responding through Mark's counsel and refusing to engage directly. I was careful not to accept any offers that didn't meet contractual obligations or acknowledge the full scope of damages. His offers to reinstate me or pay partial severance were declined, as I recognized the value of leveraging our strong legal position rather than settling prematurely. My response was always measured and consistent. My lawyers will be in touch. Meanwhile, I continued to document every interaction meticulously. All emails, phone calls, and messages from Mason or company representatives were archived with timestamps, preserving a clear record of my professional approach and Mason's increasing desperation. This comprehensive documentation reinforced our legal claims and protected me against any potential counterclaims. The mounting legal and regulatory pressure visibly unsettled Mason. His influence within Northbridge eroded as senior executives distanced themselves, wary of association with the unfolding scandal. His attempts to onboard the junior replacement faltered amid internal resistance, as colleagues expressed concerns about the disruptions and ethical questions raised by the lawsuit. At the same time, I maintained transparent yet professional communication with my top clients, reassuring them of continuity and my commitment despite the turmoil. This was crucial in preserving relationships and mitigating further account losses. I avoided any disparagement of Northbridge publicly, focusing instead on factual updates and affirming my dedication to client service. While the situation remained tense and unresolved, these combined pressures, legal action, regulatory investigation, client defections, and internal company upheaval, created a strategic environment increasingly unfavorable to Mason and Northbridge's aggressive tactics. The lawsuit had become the fulcrum around which professional accountability and justice revolved. In this phase, my role was to remain calm, methodical, and professionally engaged, allowing the legal process and documented facts to drive outcomes. The conflict was far from over, but our position had never been stronger. The evidence was unassailable, the regulatory bodies attentive, and the client's trust largely intact. This stage set the foundation for subsequent developments, where legal leverage and professional integrity would continue to shape the unfolding resolution. Mason's termination for gross misconduct and data tampering marked a significant escalation in the unfolding corporate crisis at Northbridge Solutions. The decision came swiftly after internal investigations, which confirmed that his unauthorized deletion of client files was not only a violation of company policy, but also a serious breach of trust and fiduciary duty. The Human Resources and Compliance departments collaborated closely to gather comprehensive evidence, including system logs, email records, and testimonies from IT and sales staff, before presenting their findings to executive leadership. The board recognized that Mason's actions had compromised both operational integrity and regulatory compliance, leaving no option but to terminate him immediately for cause. This termination was publicly communicated within the company with a carefully crafted internal memo that emphasized Northbridge's commitment to ethical standards and data security. The memo avoided naming Mason explicitly, but described the misconduct in enough detail to quell rumors and reinforce the company's stance against unauthorized data manipulation. From a professional standpoint, this move was necessary to restore confidence among employees and reassure clients that the company was taking corrective action. However, the ripple effects of Mason's sabotage extended beyond his dismissal. Regulatory bodies soon imposed financial penalties on Northbridge Solutions, totaling $250,000. The Data Privacy Commission's investigation concluded that Mason's deletion of client files violated multiple provisions of data protection laws, including unauthorized data modification and failure to maintain adequate security controls. These violations triggered mandatory fines under relevant statutes designed to safeguard personal and commercial data. The penalties were accompanied by a directive requiring Northbridge to implement enhanced data governance measures and conduct staff training on compliance protocols. The company's legal and compliance teams worked quickly to draft and submit remediation plans, acknowledging the breach and outlining steps to prevent recurrence. Parallel to regulatory fines, Northbridge suffered tangible financial losses due to client defections. The deletion of client files and the resulting operational disruptions severely undermined customer confidence. 3 major clients, representing an aggregate annual revenue of approximately $3 million, transferred their accounts to competing firms within weeks of the incident. These clients cited concerns over data integrity, service reliability, and contractual stability in their formal communications with Northbridge. I personally documented these correspondence threads and preserved signed termination notices to support claims for lost commissions and reputational damages during ongoing legal proceedings. Internally, the incident triggered a comprehensive audit of Northbridge's sales and data management processes. The audit uncovered additional mismanagement issues that had gone unnoticed during Mason's tenure, ranging from inadequate access controls to inconsistent enforcement of contract renewal procedures. These findings prompted the company's leadership to initiate a restructuring of the regional sales division, with new protocols introduced to enhance oversight and accountability. Senior management announced the appointment of an interim regional sales director, with a mandate to restore operational stability and rebuild client trust. These organizational changes were communicated transparently to the sales floor, accompanied by training sessions to reinforce compliance awareness. Industry-wide, the scandal attracted attention from professional publications and trade associations. Several industry newsletters featured articles analyzing the governance failures at Northbridge, framing Mason's misconduct as a cautionary tale in sales leadership and data stewardship. These reports underscored the importance of robust documentation, contractual vigilance, and adherence to data protection standards, principles I had emphasized throughout my career. The negative publicity further exacerbated Northbridge's reputational challenges, complicating efforts to recover lost market share and maintain goodwill within the sales community. Amid these developments, I formally filed claims for wrongful termination damages, combining the $95,000 severance owed under my contract with an additional $350,000 to compensate for lost commissions, client attrition, and reputational harm. These claims were submitted through my legal counsel, with supporting evidence meticulously referenced. The filings detailed the sequence of events, contractual breaches, financial impact assessments, and expert testimonies, forming a comprehensive legal framework for compensation. My approach remained steadfastly professional and focused on quantifiable damages rather than personal grievances, reinforcing the legitimacy of my case. Finally, Mason faced professional discipline beyond Northbridge. The company reported his misconduct to the Regional Sales Association and relevant industry licensing boards. These bodies initiated formal reviews of Mason's conduct and professional license status, considering sanctions that could include suspension or revocation. Notices of these proceedings were documented and shared with legal counsel, underscoring the severity of the infractions and their potential long-term impact on Mason's career. This external scrutiny served as an additional layer of accountability, reinforcing the message that such breaches would carry consequences beyond immediate employment. Throughout this challenging phase, I maintained meticulous records of all developments: board decisions, fines levied, client communications, internal restructuring plans, and industry publications. These records ensured that every facet of the professional and financial fallout was documented with precision, preserving the integrity of my case as it advanced. The landscape within Northbridge was shifting rapidly, but my commitment to systematic evidence-based action never wavered. The termination of Mason and the company's penalties underscored the seriousness of the situation. However, the broader implications for my career and client relationships remained an active and evolving challenge. The court's judgment was a decisive professional validation of the case I had methodically built over the previous months. The final award included the $95,000 severance that had been guaranteed by my contract's explicit terms, in addition to $375,000 in damages and legal fees to compensate for lost commissions, reputational harm, and the financial impact of Gregory Mason's sabotage. This figure reflected a thorough calculation of the direct and indirect losses I sustained, not just a punitive sum, but a quantifiable acknowledgement of the professional and economic consequences of Mason's deliberate actions. Parallel to the court's ruling, regulatory authorities released their final determinations. Northbridge Solutions was levied fines exceeding $250,000, penalties rooted in the documented breaches of data protection laws and failure to implement adequate internal controls. The Data Privacy Commission's report cited multiple violations, including unauthorized deletion of client data, insufficient audit trails, and lack of multi-factor authentication protocols that Mason had exploited. These findings were not merely procedural footnotes. They underscored systemic vulnerabilities in Northbridge's data governance frameworks, which the company was mandated to rectify immediately. Compliance officers were ordered to oversee the implementation of rigorous security reforms, and employee training programs were mandated to prevent recurrence. One of the more consequential professional developments was the formal blacklisting of Gregory Mason within the regional sales community. The local sales association, informed of the gravity of his gross misconduct and breach of fiduciary duty, enacted sanctions barring him from holding sales leadership positions or accessing client data management systems for a minimum of 5 years. Additionally, the Regional Licensing Board assigned to oversee professional sales certifications initiated disciplinary proceedings that placed Mason's credentials under review, with a strong likelihood of suspension or revocation. This outcome marked a significant professional fall, one that reflected both legal accountability and industry-level governance. At Northbridge Solutions, the repercussions extended beyond fines and personnel changes. The loss of trust triggered an exodus of major clients, 3 of whom accounted for approximately $3 million in annual revenue. These clients formally terminated contracts, citing concerns over data integrity and service disruption. As part of my ongoing legal documentation, I preserved all correspondence related to these account closures, including signed termination notices and client statements expressing dissatisfaction with Northbridge's handling of the crisis. These documents fortified claims for consequential damages and underscored the tangible business costs of Mason's sabotage. Internally, the scandal catalyzed a comprehensive audit of Northbridge's sales division and data management processes. The findings exposed systemic lapses that had gone unnoticed during Mason's tenure: inconsistent enforcement of contract renewals, inadequate access controls, and insufficient oversight of data security protocols. Management responded with a leadership overhaul, appointing an interim regional sales director, tasked explicitly with restoring operational stability and rebuilding client confidence. The company also instituted mandatory compliance training sessions and revised data governance policies, aiming to repair reputational damage and prevent future breaches. The broader industry took notice as well. Trade publications and professional newsletters featured detailed case studies analyzing the Northbridge incident, highlighting it as a cautionary example of the critical importance of thorough documentation, contractual awareness, and data security in sales leadership roles. These analyses reinforced the principles I had adhered to throughout my career and served as a professional vindication of my approach. The public discussions further eroded Northbridge's market standing, complicating its efforts to recover lost market share and client trust. Within this context, I formally submitted claims for wrongful termination damages that combined the contractually owed severance with additional compensation for lost commissions, client attrition, and reputational harm, totaling $445,000. These claims were prepared with comprehensive supporting evidence, including financial impact analyses, expert testimonies on industry standards, and documented client defections. My legal counsel meticulously cross-referenced every claim with the documented timeline and correspondence, ensuring a robust and defensible position. Simultaneously, Mason's professional disciplinary proceedings progressed. Reports of his misconduct were lodged with the Regional Sales Association and the licensing boards, triggering formal investigations that could culminate in long-term suspension or revocation of his professional credentials. These external sanctions symbolized the industry's condemnation of his conduct and emphasized that professional accountability extended beyond internal company consequences. Throughout these developments, I maintained a detailed, organized record of all proceedings, rulings, and communications. This archive not only supported my ongoing legal and professional claims, but also served as a personal reference point for assessing the evolving situation. The landscape within Northbridge was fundamentally altered. Leadership had shifted, regulatory oversight had intensified, and the company faced a long road to redemption. Yet amid these changes, my own career trajectory was poised for transformation. The court's award and regulatory findings affirmed the soundness of my strategic approach, grounded in professionalism, meticulous documentation, and measured patience. The recognition from external authorities and industry bodies reinforced my standing as a knowledgeable and principled account manager. As the legal and regulatory processes continued to unfold, I prepared to leverage this momentum toward new professional opportunities, confident that the integrity and systems I had cultivated would secure my future in the industry. Now consulting for Titan Corp with a 30% salary increase and an equity stake, I find myself in a markedly different professional environment, one where my expertise is not only valued, but actively leveraged to shape strategic client engagement and CRM optimization. This transition represents more than a new job title. It's a reaffirmation of the professional principles that sustained me through the conflict at Northbridge. The contrast is stark. Where before sabotage and undermining tactics threatened to derail my career, at Titan there is a clear alignment of interests, respect for contractual boundaries, and an organizational culture that prioritizes data integrity and client trust. From the outset, my consulting role has been structured to capitalize on the systems and protocols I pioneered at Northbridge, but now with the backing of a leadership team that understands their necessity. My initial projects involve auditing Titan's client data management workflows, identifying potential vulnerabilities, and recommending enhancements to backup protocols and access controls. It's a position that allows me to apply my 15 years of experience in a proactive, preventative fashion rather than a reactive one. The equity stake further incentivizes my commitment, tying my success to the company's growth and reinforcing a mutual interest in long-term stability. Importantly, this role affords me a significantly improved work-life balance. The toxic dynamics and constant tension I endured under Mason's leadership are absent here. At Titan, I am encouraged to cultivate professional relationships with transparency and mutual respect, fostering collaboration rather than competition. The environment enables thoughtful, strategic decision-making rather than reactionary maneuvers driven by personal vendettas or cost-cutting pressures. This positive shift has a measurable impact on my productivity and job satisfaction. underscoring how organizational culture influences not just individual careers, but overall business outcomes. Reflecting on the entire ordeal, the experience reinforced several critical professional lessons. Meticulous documentation, emails, contract versions, backup logs, proved indispensable. Without this detailed record-keeping, Mason's sabotage could have gone unchallenged, and my claims would have lacked the evidentiary foundation necessary for legal and regulatory success. Investing time in creating and maintaining these records, while sometimes tedious, was the strategic cornerstone that protected my career and reputation. Moreover, a deep understanding of contractual terms, particularly regarding non-compete clauses and severance conditions, was crucial. Many professionals neglect these details or assume they are standard formalities, but in my case, these clauses became powerful leverage. They not only guaranteed financial protection, but also established clear boundaries that Mason could not lawfully cross. Consulting regularly with legal counsel throughout the process ensured that my interpretations remained accurate and that every step was compliant with evolving case law and regulatory frameworks. Perhaps the most valuable takeaway was the importance of measured, strategic patience. Despite the provocation, maintaining calm professionalism prevented the situation from escalating into a public spectacle detrimental to all parties. Resisting the impulse to respond emotionally preserved my credibility with clients, colleagues, and ultimately the courts. Each communication was considered, deliberate, and documented, turning what could have been a chaotic conflict into a structured negotiation and legal process with defined parameters. At Titan, I continue to advocate for these principles within the broader industry. I contribute to seminars and workshops focused on best practices in client data management and contractual awareness, sharing my experience as a case study in overcoming professional sabotage through preparedness and strategic action. These engagements reinforce my professional standing and allow me to mentor others facing similar challenges. The industry has taken note, and the case is frequently cited as a benchmark for how meticulous documentation and contract literacy can safeguard careers and companies alike. While the lawsuit and regulatory actions at Northbridge brought justice and compensation, the real victory lies in the strengthened professional identity I've cultivated. The ordeal tested not just my skills but my resilience, and emerging from it with integrity intact affirms the value of calm, calculated, and legally grounded responses to workplace adversity. I remain vigilant, continuously refining my documentation protocols and legal knowledge, aware that the business environment can be unpredictable, but confident that systematic preparation and professionalism are the best defenses. In sum, this chapter of my career closed not with acrimony, but with a strategic advancement and a renewed sense of professional purpose. The systems, contracts, and relationships that once protected me now empower me to contribute at a higher level, guiding others to understand that competence, patience, and rigor form the foundation of enduring professional success. My experience at Northbridge, though painful, became a crucible forging a more capable, respected, and strategically positioned leader, one whose career trajectory now points firmly upward.